Hello and welcome to CU Boulder's Office of Pre-Health Advising Interview Strategies Workshop Part 1. My name is Dana Parcher. I am the Director of Pre-Health Advising, and I'm excited to talk to you today about interview strategies. Before we go into the typical agenda for today's workshop, I do want to say that you might want to have something handy to write on, questions to write down while you're going through the workshop so that you can ask your pre-health advisor. And then there's also a handout that accompanies this presentation, so you can do some activities and practice on your own. In future presentations, we'll do even more hands-on work and some practice with your fellow peers, which I know sounds intimidating, but we have to practice so we can get better at interviews. Before I jump into the agenda, I'm going to share just 4 slides here on just some background, make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to what to expect for interviews. So the first one is that schools today are doing holistic review. They've really moved away from just focusing on those with high test scores or high GPAs to looking at candidates with more competencies. So for example, they're looking for students with academic readiness, yes, but they're also looking for great fit, great knowledge of the profession, students who show attributes that might be really great for their professional school. Specifically, maybe they have certain values they really care about, like rural healthcare, and they want to make sure that you also care about that. So there's a lot that really goes into the interview process nowadays. So what does the interview process look like? So first of all, you get your interview invitation, usually through email. It's so exciting to get, and we do want to hear about your interview invitations. We love hearing how excited you are when you get them, and we can help you definitely craft any answers back to them that you feel nervous about. But after you get your interview invitation, you'll want to solidify your arrangements. So if it's in person, that might be travel or accommodations and just scheduling all of that out. That could be virtual today, although I do know some schools are hosting in person or wanting to do that for their interviews. So that's something just to think about. Then you'll have your actual interview day, and your interview day will probably be long. I would be prepared for a campus tour on your interview, so make sure you're wearing some kind of shoes you can walk around in for a long time. And then this is also going to be drawn out with a lot of different sessions, from a welcome session to interviews with faculty, multiple mini interviews for some of you that like for pre-med, and you'll have conversations or interviews with current students in the program as well. And speaking of that, you will have conversations with a lot of people, whether they are current students in the program and it's an official interview, or they're just walking you to the next thing, or they're leading you on your campus tour, or you're talking with your the administrative assistant at the front desk somewhere, or maybe it's the person helping you schedule your interview day, or even the person who opened the door for you. So sometimes all of these people are given the opportunity to share thoughts about you. So you are always on from the moment you leave your car in the parking lot, if it's in person, to the moment you log in. You are always on, and they can give feedback on you. And I do know of at least one student who was not granted an interview or acceptance because of how they were rude to an administrative assistant in an interview. So be sure to be polite to everyone you meet. And then step 3 here on this oversimplified version of the interview process is to wait. And that is often for what feels like forever. And even then you have to wait some more, and that feels like forever even more. But sometimes this can be months. And I know that that sounds like just such a long time to wait, but it's really not uncommon at all in healthcare professional schools timelines to go through that kind of waiting process. It can be a really long time to hear back. And it's just the nature of healthcare professional schools and the whole interview game. You do not need to send something back to the school, especially if they say they don't want additional correspondence. I know that can be really hard, but if they say that, you will definitely want to follow the rules here and not send something back to the schools. So there are 3 different types of interviews. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about what do the interviewers know about you in advance. So you could have an open file interview, which is more rare today, but that's where the interviewer has read your entire application file. You could also have a closed file interview, which means that they know nothing about you and they have not read your file, or a partial file interview where they've read some information about you, but not all of it. Mostly they're leaving out grades or test scores. This is the most common type of interview. And you can definitely ask this question if they haven't told you what type of interview it is. You could ask this question when you're scheduling your interview, when you're confirming it, or maybe when they give the agenda for the day and it doesn't say it there, you could ask a clarifying question after that. So the types of interviews, we'll have a couple different here. You'll have an individual interview. I think that is fairly common sense, but that's one-to-one. So your interviewer plus you. You'll have a panel interview. Sometimes this exists where you have just you with several different interviewers, maybe like 3 faculty. You could have a group interview, which is a little bit more rare and sometimes intimidating, but that's where you just have one faculty member interviewing multiple interviewees. So that might be you amongst 3 or 4 different interviewees, all of whom you don't know. You could have a multiple mini interview. This is where you would have a series of brief interviews, usually 1 question per interviewer at one time, and you do multiple of those in a row with different interviewers. We're going to discuss this one and group interviews in future workshops. So we're not going to cover that today, but that one and the dual degree programs, you sometimes can have additional interviews for that. So that's for like MD, PhD students, and those types of things might ask additional questions of you. So today's workshop is really focused on what are the interviewers hoping to learn about you? What are the types of questions or categories that you can expect to be asked? How can you craft a really awesome answer? And what kind of tips can you have in preparing and being successful overall for interviews? We are definitely going to cover more about interviewing in future workshops. This is just to get us started. So what are they hoping to learn about you? Well, there's like 4 different things here that most of them are trying to learn about you. Number 1, are you academically ready? Usually this is asked of you internally before you're even given an interview. They wouldn't be inviting you if they didn't think you weren't somewhat showing potential to be academically ready for their program. So you won't always get questions in this category unless you had some difficulty in your academics and it shows up on your audit or transcript, or your GPA, or you had some kind of blip on your test exam. And so you will want to practice some of those, and your pre-health advisor can definitely help you with some of those tricky questions. But you really just want to focus on your growth and how you may have overcome those situations. And you want to be mature and just really answer them forthright and don't make up excuses about any difficulties in your application or your academics. The other questions here are you making a well-educated career choice, and can you demonstrate that you are? So they're really wanting to know, what have you brought to the table in terms of knowing about this career field? Are you a great fit for this line of work? And are you a great fit for this particular school? Most of the time, interviewers' intentions are genuine and pure, and they're really just wanting to make sure that you're a good fit. I know it can be really scary and sound intimidating to interview with a lot of different people, but they're really mostly just trying to make sure they get to know you, the real you. So as much as you can have fun with it, I encourage you to, because you can make connections with the interviewers across the table who really can become your biggest advocate behind the scenes. A lot of times advisors are actually invited to sit on the other side of this interview process so we can learn how to help you all as pre-health students. And I have seen that. I have seen a student make a genuine connection with the other person across the table, both times, not about something specifically in the main point of their discussion that day. One time it was about guitar hobby, I think, and then the other time I think it was a summer camp that they went to, as well as the interviewer's children. And so I'm not saying that that always happens, but if you have more fun with it and you're more authentic and engaged with the process, then more of you is going to show in your answers, and they're going to be drawn to that naturally. And so it really can help you. That being said, Sometimes you can have a really high stress type of interview. It does happen. And if it does happen to you, the main thing here is just to stay calm. Treat them like a challenging peer or that challenging team member on your team or a challenging professional. And just remain true to yourself and your answers. And that's really all you can do in this situation. Okay, so this is also a slide where we have a handout moment. So take a moment to pause and look at the handout and ask yourself some of the questions there on the first page that's about self-assessment questions. These are related to you, obviously, self-assessment, and these are going to be where possible interview questions come from. So it's important that you take a moment to look at yourself and find what your authentic commitment is to science, to serving others, to all of it. Because they're looking to see that you're this mature person who really can make decisions for the benefit of others, even when it's not convenient for you, even when it's tough, and that you're really committed to this type of, service profession. They're also looking for what is great for their school, a great fit from you and their particular school. And this goes beyond, reputation, which a lot of students mistakenly focus on, but it's really about what is the school value and what are you bringing? What are your values? What are your experiences? And what are your motivations? And so these questions on the handout can really help you perhaps take a moment to think through those, because you will be asked questions based on some of these main competencies. And if they take a particular approach on something like their clinical training or student culture or student organizations, you might also find ways that you could ask them more about their program and demonstrate your own fit on the other side of things. So when you have a chance to ask the program questions, that's another really great way for you to show fit. So I encourage you to pause the video for just a second, look over that part of the handout, maybe time yourself, take a few minutes to just try to answer 5 of those questions. You can either say them out loud, you can do a few bullet points, you can just think about them. But by the time you actually interview, I hope you will have gone through all of these. But at least for the workshop today, just give yourself a chance to ask yourself a few. Okay, so types of interview questions. So as you can see in the handout, we started with what they want to know about you, and then I paired that with some questions about what they might ask you. However, I want to say that there's just no way you can prepare for every question they might ask you under the sun. There's like websites out there with hundreds and hundreds of questions on it, and there's just not possible. However, there are ways to prepare for the main topics, and I've tried to put them into some categories, into the basic questions that you might get asked. We start with the most fundamental, and I put this in its own category because you need to know this one by heart, which is the why question. Why do you want to be a blank? How do you know you want to be a blank? Sometimes this is partnered with tell me more about yourself, those kinds, tell me your background and why do you want to be a physician? But the main thing here is the why. And we really want to know this question. I'll come back to it more later. Then we have some behavioral or situational questions, which are often, tell me a time when blah, blah, blah happened. Tell me a time when you had to think on your feet. Tell me a time when you initiated something. And that's where you're going to have to describe a situation. You have your classic questions, like tell me about yourself, greatest weakness, strength. And then you have your other column, which is really fun questions I can't always categorize or predict. So this might consist of questions requiring ethical decision-making, or if you've conducted research, this will definitely have research-related questions here. And sometimes schools and programs ask really off-the-wall questions, so you just never know, and other category is always needed. I did want to point out at the top, though, that overall, you can expect to be asked on anything related to competencies for becoming the professional you want to be. And that's where page 1 of the handout comes in. So for some of you, that list has already been established, like for med school, and that's the one I'm using here on this handout. But for others, they might have that list in the making, or to be honest, they use the pre-med competency list. It's a good one to use. It's very thorough. It's very holistic. A lot of schools and a lot of programs like it. So even if, you're pre-optometry and they don't have a core competency list, and they might, but some of the programs, they might just use this one as well. One of the key things to pause and think about for yourself is, what is the interviewer thinking about when they're asking me this question? I often think this is the primary thing to think about when you're stumped, but it's also just not just when you're stumped. So if someone's saying, tell me a time when you initiated something, you might pause and ask yourself, why would they be asking that question? Well, being in veterinary medicine, I'm going to have to, initiate multiple conversations with my clients, maybe initiate a practice in this office, start different things, be a leader on my team. So they might be asking me this question because it relates to my future career. So that was kind of an easy connection. But if you're ever stumped, like, that is just one key thing to think about. Why are they asking me this question? So I want to share with you, before I go into some of the questions, some tips for crafting great answers, because this pattern can be used again and again for so many different types of questions, perhaps not all, but definitely majority. So humans love stories. We respond really well to storytelling, and it really helps to give anecdotes that can be memorable about you as a person, because it helps them relate to you and it helps them remember you. So this can really help you convey your personal strengths, your story, your background, without sounding just so forthright about it. So that really decreases your chance of being arrogant or boastful when you can actually lump it into a story instead of just saying, well, I'm a really great communicator. If you say the story about what happened when you were a great communicator in some way, people are more likely to believe it. They're more likely to connect with you, and it's more likely for you to sound a little bit more genuine. It creates a more humble sense of who you are, I'll say. So there's a few steps here. You may have heard of the STAR method, and I've linked that in the references at the end. I also like the PAR method. It's basically the same thing, because P can stand for problem or situation, and that's STAR, right? STAR. But I kind of like PAR because it's shorter for my brain to remember. And I think that it kind of helps with a lot more different types of scenarios that fit into these categories. So P for problem, situation, or issue. So you're setting the scene, you're giving them background to help them understand the situation you were in, and describing, the event or the issue, the problem, whatever it might have been. It can be fairly generalized, but enough to give them some context and detail to understand the situation. And then action or task. So what action you took in the situation. Another way of thinking about it is, what goal were you trying to work towards? Maybe it was, the problem was a conflict between you and a peer, and the goal you were trying to work towards was to see the other person's side, or to both come to a compromise on this team project you were working on. And then step 3 is to convey the outcome of your action. So many students miss this. I know it's surprising because it's kind of like the conclusion of your story, but it is so important to share what actually happened. So I worked with my my peer on this project we were working on. We definitely had this conflict, whatever it might have been, give more detail than what I'm doing right here. And we both moved towards an outcome where part of what they put into the presentation was added on slides 6, 7, and 8. And then I did slides 9, 10, and 11. And it was just really great that we compromised, blah, blah, blah. So I know that was really simplified, but I just wanted to reiterate that you're really needing to say what actually happened in the situation after the action that you took. And then the last one I really love, because it's kind of like the bow on the end of the story, but it's, what insight did you gain? I learned to make sure that before we jump into this project or any projects in the future, that I really need to step back and make sure we have a good plan for what's to come between me and anyone I'm working with. Any lessons you learned, and sometimes if a student can really pull it off, any connection you can make to why they might be asking this. So I just alluded to that earlier, but you might say something like, I can imagine that in the medical profession, I'm going to need to make sure that I'm always considering the strengths, weaknesses of my team. And I think that's what I did here, and made sure that I learned that I needed to take a step back and really look at the situation differently. I'm definitely not giving a very great example here, but connecting it, if it's applicable, it's not always applicable, but if it can be a really nice conclusion here on getting a great answer out. So I think that the method here is really helpful because it's going to work for just about any situation, not all of your questions, but a lot of them. So one of those top questions, right, I said your overarching one is going to be competencies. So take a look at that handout. The first page were those self-assessment types of questions, but I want you to also look at the types of questions they might ask you based off of those. So just pause the video here for a moment and take a second to look at the types of questions that they might ask you based on competencies. Okay, so we also have behavioral questions. I want to start with behavioral and not jumping to the next one that I had on the other slide, which was about like the why medicine or why physician assistant. I want to do behavioral because I think it's a really great way for you to practice the PAR method or STAR method. So we're just going to do a little activity. So I put the PAR method at the top for you to see again. It's also in your handout. Take a moment to pause the video, take 5 minutes, which is more time than you'll actually have to say this question in real life, but this is for your prep and practice. Take 5 minutes, and I want you to do a bulleted list of the key elements you'd like to discuss in this response. Tell me a time when you had a challenging interaction with a patient. What was the situation and how did you handle it? And just see what you come up with after 5 minutes. So go ahead and pause and give it a try. Okay, we also have another activity. It's the similar thing as last time, but this time I want you to attempt to say it out loud. Maybe you did last time, maybe you didn't, but I want you to attempt to say it out loud. And if the last one was easy for you, go ahead and see if you can make your bullets even shorter or smaller and see what you come up with this time. So go ahead and pause it and practice. Tell me a time when you found yourself outside of your comfort zone. All right. So I just want to say before I move on to the next slide that both of those two questions are extremely common for just about any interview or field, healthcare field out there. So tell me a time you came outside your comfort zone. I mean, I've heard that asked at almost every interview that my students have gone to. So just be prepared for both of those. So it's good that you've already practiced them now. So prepping for questions, another activity you can do. If you want, you can pause the video and write down all the examples you can think of for the following scenarios. This is actually something I do personally for my own interviewing strategies. I have a long list of competencies that I like to look at for myself. Teamwork, adaptability, time management. There's even more on the handout. So if you'll thumb to the page on the handout where I've listed a bunch of these, decision-making, communication, motivations. And I encourage you to find more, and our office will keep adding to this as well, but the internet is full of these types of categories. But these are the ones that are really common for health profession schools to ask about. So I encourage you to just take a moment to look over the categories and then think under each one of an example where this has happened to you or where you could talk about a specific type of example under that category. So specifically under teamwork, the first one there says conflict on the slide. So I want you to think of a time when you had a conflict within a team. And then there's another one, something went wrong. Okay, maybe this team member, one of the other team members didn't ever do anything for the team. Or maybe you were in your lab and you were on a team and you dropped a beaker and like everything went wrong. So that would be an example for made a mistake, the third bullet there. Adaptability, tell me a time you're under pressure. Usually most of these bullets you can put, tell me a time when, and fill in the rest of the question. So if the quick language here I've written on the handout doesn't make sense to you, just put tell me a time when at the front. But this is really helpful for trying to think through all of the examples, anecdotes, and stories you have in your life. And I will share that as I do this activity for myself for prepping for interviews, it can take a lot longer than I think, like days, even weeks for me to do this. So I think it's important for you to maybe start a pre-health journal. I've said it before about shadowing. It's really important to write down notes. I've said this before for using that journal to prepare for your personal statement. Having a pre-health journal where you can jot down notes about what you've learned from shadowing or volunteering or work experience, where you can write insights, lessons gained, things learned. This might be a really great spot for that. Maybe you have a Google Drive with some notes in it and you put this as an Excel spreadsheet where you always go back to it, or a Google Sheet. You always go back to it and you write down the different experiences or examples that you can think of for these different areas. And it's okay to have more than one example for each of these. When it comes to time to your actual interview, you can focus that in and really make sure that you know your examples by heart so that you're never without a situation to share in your STAR or PAR method. A few things to avoid in behavioral questions. As much as it's easy to talk negatively about somebody because it really shows what you learned from a situation, I would say so much of the time it comes down to being positive and speaking with enthusiasm when you talk about your experiences. So I would avoid speaking badly about peers, current or former colleagues, people you work with, patients, clinicians, whatever it might be. I would also avoid talking about problems that you created yourself. Mistakes that you might have learned from are really easy to talk about, but that's generally not something you want to talk about in every question unless specifically asked about mistakes that you yourself made. I would avoid the drama llama, make sure that you're avoiding all drama, and try not to come across as superior in your answer. On the other hand, try not to downplay yourself either, unless it really explains how you've grown. Okay, so the big kahuna, the why. For starters, you can expect to answer this question first and foremost in almost every interview. And you should also be okay with it feeling and sounding a bit longer than some of the other questions that you'll be practicing, because it is such a big question to be sharing about yourself. So I like to say that I have some tips here of what to say during it, but I like to say that what you're going to talk about here are going to be some of the things you're going to share later in the rest of your interview questions, because typically this is the first one. So I like to call it your tray of hors d'oeuvres. So what kind of hors d'oeuvre tray do you want to be walking around at this fancy interview party in your mind? What do you want that to represent about you? What are some of those things that are going to come up later that you want to make sure are touched upon? Because you're not going to have time in this question to go over each one of those in detail. So you want to think about your highlights. So the first one is, and I also want to say that the PAR method might not work perfectly here, but it's actually still a really great thing to keep in mind, which is why I like to talk about it first and talk about behavioral questions briefly first, because you'll still really want to focus on specific aspects of what stands out to you in terms of what your initial moments are that brought you to healthcare. So just remember, human beings love stories. So if you have a story like that, like if you had a family doctor, that a person in your family who was a doctor, or your own personal family doctor that really inspired you, to become a physician, then you should speak about why that impacted you and what that means for how you're going to help take care of patients. And just remember that it's important to tie all these experiences back to how they've inspired you to help patients and enter healthcare to further that goal. But starting out with a story or having a story in here is really, really helpful. So starting out with where or how your initial interest developed is kind of where you want to begin. And then after you've spoken about these initial sparks of inspiration, you should move on to how you took your passion further and began your education. So what did you do to learn more about this field and what has it taught you? This could be shadowing, volunteer experiences, or a job in healthcare. Be specific and highlight one or two instances in particular. Again, your tray of hors d'oeuvres. And then what if your experiences taught you something else? Sidebar, that's okay. Being in healthcare means you're expected to handle the unexpected. And so if you can show that you have the skills to do that early on, then that's even better. And what better way to show that than sharing your initial reasons for wanting to enter your chosen field were challenged and changed, and they didn't turn out the way you thought. just make sure that you share how you overcome those challenges, what it taught you, and where you are today. So number 3, the reasons you're committed to going further and how you've come to know this choice is the right one for you. This includes specific reasons and examples that showed you this healthcare career path was the path you wanted to pursue, specifically, being a PA, physician, or optometrist over anything else. And it can be helpful sometimes to shadow those other things, because how else will you be able to explain why medicine and why not podiatry, without being able to really know that or look into those different areas. I like to make sure that students here explain what drives you to care for patients and why being a clinician will help you do that, and why this particular path is the one you need to reach this goal. And it can be really great here if you have time and room. Again, you should practice this all the time because you want to make sure it's not too lengthy. But if you have the room, you could share what you've learned about yourself, how you've grown through your introspection, how you've grown through reflection, and tie that into the specific reasons why they make you a better professional. So in general, speak about what you did to learn more about the world of healthcare and being the professional you want to be. That includes your experiences, outside experiences, your internal questions that you've asked yourself, and how you've taken those experiences to teach you that this is the right choice for you. This question, more than any other, is the most important, and it will be the most important for you to practice. I want you to say it while you drive to work or school. I want you to say it when you get ready, talk it out loud to yourself in the shower, write it down in bullet point form, not full sentences, although if you're nervous, you could certainly practice with writing it down in full sentences. But I don't want it to be so rehearsed that it doesn't sound natural and genuine. So it's a really important question, and I want you to practice for it, but I want you to practice in bullet point form so that it becomes just very genuine for you to always be able to say this question in the 3 main points that you need to hit. So what are the things to think about if you're really struggling to come up with this? So there's a handout moment here. Feel free to pause the video, but you could ask yourself a few of these questions. You could write these down on the side, some notepad or whatever you have handy that you might have brought along with you for the workshop. And just take like 4 minutes to give yourself some time to just sit back and think about your real answer for these questions. I mean, I know that you're great researchers and go on the internet and read all kinds of things about how to prepare for everything. But it's really easy on the internet to scroll and see these questions and not really sit back and do it. So I don't know, give yourself a moment here, just 4 or 5 minutes to reflect and really think about the answers to these questions, because they are going to be what gets you to the next level of the interview process. Okay. So just like I shared a few things about what to avoid in the behavioral interview questions, I'm going to share a few things in the what to avoid in the answering the why interview questions. And then coming up, I have some tips on general tips, 2 slides on general tips. And then I think we conclude from there. So we're almost done with our workshop today. So things to avoid. I would not mention money or profits or having a specific title in your answer. You may already be thinking that, and it may be common sense to say, but just in case you are, remember that working in healthcare is not about money, profits, or a title. It's about serving others, oftentimes sick and injured others, and often when it's not convenient for you. So it's really more than just a job or a career. It's a lifetime commitment to help and care for others. And we want to make that clear in your answers. Also, while it may sound good, mentioning, quote, being challenged is not always a good thing, mainly when it's the primary point of your answer and it's all you focus on. There are many challenging career options out there, and healthcare professionals are expected to encounter complex problems every day. So instead of explaining how and why being challenged is something you can handle daily, or instead explain why being challenged is something you can handle daily and how you will care for patients despite the daily grind and challenges. So my point here is to avoid focus only on entering this field because it's a challenging field. And really bring about why and how being challenged is something that you're excited about and can handle, and how it relates to patient care. Speaking about yourself is good in small doses, but do not focus entirely your answer on only yourself. Be sure to explain how and why your experiences have helped inspire you and driven you to help patients. Remember to mention what drives you to keep going despite adversity and challenges, and how these reasons go on to inspire you to care for others. And then many of you might have family members who are responsible professionals in healthcare who are caring for other individuals, and they may have inspired you, and that's fantastic. But if you focus only on them in your answer, it's not reason enough to really enter the profession. So we want to make sure you're entering the profession because you want to, and that they inspired you, and that you kept going to pursue this career on your own. So the last two here are, and the last three really are when you focus on that in your answer and you're not really tying it to the other parts of the why questions that I laid out in the last two slides. That's some of the biggest downfalls here. A few tips for success. We have two slides here, and then we'll conclude. So some overall tips. First of all, actually listen to the question and try to answer the question that they actually asked and not the question you expected to be asked. I often recommend that you write this down. If it's in person, it's okay, sometimes really great actually, because it shows that you're committed and thoughtful and thinking about things, to write down what they're asking so that you can refer to it when you feel like your brain is losing track of what you're saying and where your answer is going. Sometimes it's not allowed to write things down. So you should always ask if it's okay, and you should just ask in a polite and professional way. You know, I would love to be able to take notes during our interview. Would that be appropriate? Something like that. And then that way though, when you're saying your answer, you can look down briefly and see what that question was so you don't lose track of it. Most interviewees actually pause a few seconds before answering to gather their thoughts. And sometimes that feels like forever, but it's really important to be okay with silence. Even if it's just 3-4 seconds, I know that sounds like a lifetime in an interview, but it's really not, and it's completely normal to do so. So take your time to organize your thoughts before you begin to speak. And then once you do answer the question completely, stop talking. It's okay to have some silence in the room between questions as well. It can be really hard, especially for extroverts, to just stop talking. I think this is not super helpful because you're just trying to fill the silence, and it means you're taking away from A, the other questions they might be wanting to ask you, B, from the core of what you're really trying to say, and now you might be rambling in a circle instead of just answering the question. And then you know, the interviewer is also thinking about a ton of other things. They're thinking about how long you've been talking and how much time they have left to ask you the next question and who's out, you know, outside waiting for you to talk to. So they're not going to notice when you pause and it feels uncomfortable to you for them to continue taking notes or whatever they might be doing. And you feel like it's a long silence. It's really not for them. They have a lot in their mind. So it's perfectly okay for you to answer the question and then be okay with that silence. I actually think sometimes those things stand out more when I'm conducting interviews because I think that the person sounds even more confident and concise in their answer when they're not rambling on about the same thing. Like I have been on the last 2 bullet points. So we're going to move on. So your timing, you want to be comfortable with your timing. So 2 to 3 minutes long, except for the why question. You don't want that one to be, you could have that one be a little bit longer. I would say no more than 4 to 5 minutes though. 5 minutes might be pushing it. So I recommend practice and time yourself. Believe it or not, I actually time myself when I'm headed into an interview for a new job. And I think it's really important because you'll be surprised at how long you can actually, or how easy you can actually go past the 3-minute mark. Or if you answer the question in 30 seconds and then you're like, oh, I might need to say more than that. So I think it's really important to time yourself. Be aware of your eye contact and body language. Oh, I have a typo on my slide. The EE contact and body language. So this is the time where a practice interview can really help you practice natural eye kind of contact stance with your interviewer while they ask a question. And then you might look down or aside as you think of your answer. And then you might look back at them and naturally down as you answer again. Those kinds of eye movements are totally normal. When you look down or to the side or to up, you know, what in a corner, that's your brain thinking, and that's totally fine. You don't want to just like stare down your interviewer the whole time. So find your natural eye contact and body language. And the only way to do that is through practice. If you have more than one interviewer, like in a panel interview that I shared earlier, that could be a little bit tricky, but in general, you want to answer the person who asked you the main question. And then you'll also want to, politely address the others in the room through some head nods or looking directly at them, and just sort of addressing them as you answer, and then summing up with the interviewer again. This just takes practice, and something you can get used to. And then sometimes when people get nervous, their body language, they do things without even realizing it. So they might, compulsively like smooth their hair back or tuck it behind their ear. I had a student who swayed in their swivel chair just constantly when interviewing, or shaking their leg, or like I had another person with like keys in their pocket, which I told them to not even try to bring into the interview if possible, but they would like jangle their keys in their pocket. So these kinds of behaviors can sometimes take the interviewer away from the moment and instead make them focus on that behavior and not listen to your answer. So your pre-health advisor and career services and anyone else helping you practice, just be honest with them and say, hey, I would really love for you to give me feedback on my body language also when I answer these questions and not just my content, so that I can get good feedback on, things I might not notice about myself. You also want to use professional language and not casual terms with your interviewers. While this probably goes unsaid, it's really important here to note, because I think we all use casual phrases that you might not have expected that you would say in the middle of an interview. And so it's important to just practice and ask the people who are helping you to comment on it if that's something you're constantly doing or do on more than one occasion. If you're asked a question to which you don't know the answer, it's okay to say, I don't know. When applicable, you can also say, I don't know about that specific item that you just asked me about, but I do know about this, something relevant and closely related and tangential. Would you like me to discuss that? And asking them that, they'll say, yeah, that sounds great. Yes, I would love to discuss that with you. Why don't you answer the question on that? And they also have the right to say, you know what? No, that's okay. Thanks for saying that you don't know. I would love to ask you a different question instead. So it's okay to say that. I don't know that this will always come up, and I want you to be more prepared to answer just about any question, but I just want to let you know, overall tip, it's okay to admit when you don't know something rather than make it up. And then be sure to practice, practice, practice. Our office, the Office of Pre-Health Advising, will do mock interviews for you when you are ready to apply and you've been assigned a principal pre-health advisor. We do these workshops on all different types of interview tips and tricks. And you also have career services. And then you have your friends, family, you have mentors, you have other people that you can practice with. And I want you to practice with just about everybody. And I want you to practice out loud. It's really important to articulate what you're trying to say and to hear yourself try to say it. So make sure you're practicing out loud as well. One more slide on a few more tips for success here. Really know your strengths. When I prepare for interviews, I always write my top 3 to 5 strengths at the top of my interview sheet, the one with all of my examples that I told you about earlier. And for each one of those, I want you to have a power story or a star story ready, some kind of anecdote that illustrates that strength. And I always like to write also at least one limitation, just so that I'm always prepared for that. But that might be something that you also prepare for separately. This is just your overall kind of tip for success. Consider your anecdotes and really know them. So that previous activity I told you about, do it for as many areas you can think of. Have an answer where applicable, where an anecdote really fits, in ready to go for almost every question you can think of or any question in that handout. Know your professional mission statement. So this might not always come up, but sometimes it does. And sometimes it's really great in your why question. And to be honest, sometimes it's really just great to throw in if it fits certain of your examples. So it's good to think about ahead of time. So what is the positive change you hope to bring to the profession? What are you hoping to do? And it doesn't mean that you have to rewrite everything and change all of healthcare and change whatever practice, all the practices that are out there. It could be something really small. like being an active listener for patients or whatever it might be. But what is some kind of positive change you hope to bring to the profession is something you really should ask yourself. Another way of phrasing this might be, it's not quite the same, but what would you hope your future patients would describe you as a future professional? I would also be ready to articulate why you're interested in that particular school, definitely beyond their reputation. That's one of the biggest mistakes, is to only focus on geography or reputation. So we want to focus on, a specific type of curriculum they're offering, a value that they care about that you also care about, a student organization that really stands out to you that you want to be plugged into, that you were really committed to at CU Boulder. We're actually going to do some workshops on how to dig into these questions a little bit more, but that is something that you'll want to think about. And then they're always going to ask, well, not always, but 90% of the time, they're going to ask, is there anything else you wanted to tell us? And the answer to this question is always, yes, of course, I want to tell you more things. Never lose the opportunity or chance to share something about yourself with the committee. Maybe it's one of your strengths that they never got to. Maybe it's a different anecdote or an activity that isn't on your application. It's something you did in fall. Maybe it's something unique about you that you want to share. Be ready to have that ready to go. You might need more than one example here, so that in case you use some of the other ones elsewhere, you always have something to share. And then prepare a list of written questions that you'll want to ask them. You can 100% write these down. For in-person, you might use like a Padfolio. Just if you don't know what that is, just Google Office Max Padfolio. You'll probably find like one of those black Padfolios that you can write questions in. I actually personally really recommend these for in-person because it also gives your hands something to do and hold on to. It gives you a chance to write down those questions that they're asking you, gives you a chance to put the interview schedule in there, whatever it might be. So I really like having a Padfolio. I think it's really helpful. Your pre-health advisor can definitely help you think of a list of questions to ask them. And I have a reference link at the end of the workshop, but this just really shows that you're prepared and thorough and really taking the school seriously and the program seriously. I always really like it when my interviewees for different positions I interview for ask questions that are really thoughtful. So just taking time to prepare this ahead of time will really set you apart. Okay, and then I think we have some future workshops I just wanted to share with you, tips on answering tricky questions, like how to address poor grades or run-ins with the law, stuff like that. How to answer other questions like research, strengths, weaknesses, ethics, more. Tips for what to do as you enter interview season. So things to be thinking about as you enter fall, and what to expect on your interviews, from what to wear to how to act, how to greet everybody, what to say. And then actual practice with real peers we're going to do in future workshops. Today was quite introspective in nature and really just getting you started, getting your toes in the water for interviews. So we have some references here on the very last slide. I'll be sharing the slides with you as well so that you have all of those links. And of course, we are always here to talk to you about interviews or anything else that you might need on your pre-health journey. So I hope you've enjoyed the workshop, and I hope to see you at future workshops and other advising sessions in the future, and have a great rest of your day.